Sådär, då är klockan 9.31 så vi kör väl igång. God morgon allihopa, välkomna till veckans Snacka Kubernetes med Conoa. Idag så kommer vi ha vår första icke-Conoa-talare. Så kommer det vara Thwaites som är tekniker pre-sale på Mirantis. Så vi kommer köra presentationen på engelska. Lite kort bakgrunden till varför vi gör det här. Vi har ju satt ihop en liten agenda här under hela våren, varje vecka på torsdagar, för att prata Kubernetes och containers och hela landskapet kring det här området. Och vi kommer att blanda högt och lågt för er som är nya. Det kommer att vara både mjuka ämnen och tekniska ämnen. Och framförallt så kommer det vara talare från Conoa, våra konsulter, som delar med sig av erfarenheter och saker vi har plockat upp ute på riktiga kundcase helt enkelt då. Vi kör digitalt tills vidare, som ni förstår, 45 minuter, och jag påminner alltid om den här e-mailadressen längst ner, meetup@conoa.se. Ni får jättegärna höra av er, fråga feedback och ge förslag på dragningar som ni skulle vilja se. Jag tänkte också göra en liten påminnelse för KubeCon som går av stapeln 4 till 7 maj, virtuellt event i år. Och den här veckan så har de en early bird på $10 för registreringar till alla spår och allt som händer helt enkelt. Det kommer vara fullmatade 4 dagar och $10 är billigare än $75. Så passa på och signa upp för det här idag. Ni hittar det jätteenkelt genom att googla KubeCon 2021. Det är första alternativet som Google presenterar för er. Praktiskt, vi spelar in webbinariet som vanligt, postar det på våran YouTube-kanal. Ställ gärna frågor i Q&A-chatten så tar vi dem vartefter eller på slutet, lite grann beroende på vad som passar. Dagens bästa fråga vinner som vanligt en trendig Kubernetes t-shirt. Och Kai är enväldig domare, inget går att överklaga. So with that I'm going to switch to English. And we will have, as I said, Thwaites, who's a technical pre-sale at Mirantis. He's going to do a presentation and demo on Lens. So, Steven, I'm going to stop here and give controls to you.
Thank you, Patrik. Let me just prepare my screen for you all. Okay, Patrik, could you give me a thumbs up to say that that's okay and you can see?
Yep.
It's coming through. Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Thwaites, and just a warm welcome to you on this cold morning. And thank you, by the way, for tuning in English today. I could deliver this in, or attempt to deliver this in Swedish. I'm sure it'd be very funny, but wouldn't be very informative. So thanks for bearing with me. Today's presentation is around Lens, which is a Kubernetes IDE, and we'll just kind of step through the agenda very shortly. But by way of introduction, I live and work in London. I work at Mirantis, and I've been working with containers since my time working at Docker as well. And I work with the team at Conoa and the team at Mirantis all across Europe and internationally to help people adopt Cloud Native technology, really, working with Kubernetes and containers for some time. So for today, really I want to just kind of introduce and show you Lens and kind of talk about where it's kind of headed and how we're thinking of it at Mirantis. It's one of our kind of main pieces, or certainly one of our strategic pieces of open source software that we've been working with since we bought it into Mirantis and since we brought the team into Mirantis in the middle of last year. So I just want to kind of cover the problems it's attempting to solve, and you know why we think it's important and why we think it's a very useful place to start in terms of integrations with other technologies as well. So and we'll talk a little bit about where the project is heading, and then I'm just going to show it to you, just show you some of the features in it and how it can be used. And then of course we'll build in some time towards the end for some Q&A. So please come with your questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Okay. So if you are already a Kubernetes user, I suspect you probably are, you'll be working with kubectl or kubectl, pick your pronunciation. Most of the time when you're working with kube, or you'll be automating Kubernetes with kubectl. And it is the de facto standard, if you like, for interacting with Kubernetes. It's part of the project. It is the built-in CLI for working with kube. And it's effectively an API client, right? So it's a piece of client software you can install locally. You can, you get it from directly from open source or in various sort of packaging formats for different platforms. And then you configure it to point at the API server of a Kubernetes cluster. And there you basically have a whole tree of commands which are involved with interacting with Kubernetes objects. And you can work with many of those interactively, or the word is imperatively, to work with and modify objects in the API. Or alternatively, you can work with YAML and then actually send declarative definitions to the API server as well. Now, this is one of the reasons, I think kubectl is one of the reasons, as well as the kube architecture, etc., is one of the reasons why kube has a reputation for complexity. Certainly, when you look at the surveys the CNCF puts out about, what are the barriers to adoption of Kubernetes, the complexity of it is something that that people find as a real barrier. And so unless you're using this stuff on the day-to-day, then you need to sort of develop that muscle memory to work with it. But I absolutely think, I'm about to introduce to you another way of working with it, but I still think, by the way, that kubectl is a absolutely vital sort of skill set for a Kubernetes administrator. So you shouldn't be discouraged. Keep working with it. There's tons of even browser-based tutorials and things like that you should be getting to work with. There's no better way really to understand how Kubernetes fits together. But when you are working with it, there are commands and there are subcommands and there are sub-subcommands and there are flags and there are things which are in alpha and beta and things like that in the API. And so that itself can be quite a big or steep learning curve for working with Kubernetes, and it's also subject to change. So between different versions, you'll sometimes find that there are differences between the syntax, or certain features get added or deprecated, etc. So that can be in itself, again, quite a task to kind of pick up. And all the while as well, you're going to be working potentially with different clusters, right? It's just a client, so you can point at that different cluster, point the same software at different clusters and perform actions to take effect in different places. And you can also make sure you're taking the actions in the right namespace. So for example, if I want to go and say, go and get my pods, then those pods could be, you have to, unless you're explicitly referring to the right place, or unless you've configured your client to be looking in the right place, then you may be actually looking at the wrong information. And this is a really common mistake that I certainly make as well, where I kind of, I'm interrogating a system or trying to take some action, not seeing the results I expect to see. And that's because my kubectl client, I'm not specifying the namespace I'm talking to. I'm not specifying the cluster that I'm speaking to. I'm in the wrong context, as they say. So all of these things are kind of, what I'd probably call like, paper cuts or sharp edges, if you like, that people kind of trip up on, and it takes away from the kind of pleasurable experience. And it's also, people might, give up at that point or think it's too hard for them, etc. And of course, what we all want is to increase Kubernetes adoption. We want people to work with it more and for cloud native software to become more prevalent in the world. So people some of the ways people work to overcome this, right, is by, they fix some of these problems themselves, right? It's outside of the scope of kubectl, but you'll have, different ways of kind of improving that. I can actually show on my system in a second. So you'll have, plugins for the command line to extend its functionality, but you also have things like utilities that people will use for example, changing context, like kubectx that I use here. Aliases, you can see on that image on the right hand side from my console output. I've aliased K, for example, and people have some really sophisticated aliases, but these are the ways of kind of saving time and making sure all the things you're doing commonly are a bit more efficient, a bit less prone to error. And also things like prompt decoration. So what I mean by that is, where you have your prompt in the CLI and you'll be working with, in Windows or in Linux, you can basically decorate your prompt, not just to show, the path that you're currently in, your current working directory, but of course things like, just in the same way people do with Git, for example, to show what branch they're on and whether they have unstaged commits, unstaged commits and things like that. We can also specify what context we're working in. So all of these things are really important conveniences for working with kubectl. In fact, I can here on my system here, and I hope this is coming through okay for everybody. I do have Minikube running here. I've also got a Kubernetes cluster out in the cloud as well, or out on our demo cloud that we use. So you can see, in my environment, I've aliased K. I've also got things like kube CTX as well, and that kind of exposes that will give me a nice kind of prompt that I can use for switching between different contexts. And just once you're actually in there, things like looking at the API resources, this is the kind of number of API resources that you can work with in Kube and that you might want to be interacting with. And you can see that there's built-in short names and things like that, but at the same time, these are this itself can be quite a lot to learn, and that is also assuming that you're just working with the core kind of API resources in Kubernetes, which can of course be extended. They can be extended to use custom resources. And for most people, there's sort of an 80-20 rule of most people to be using with the same most of the same resources most of the time. Okay, so there'll be things like obviously pods, deployments, persistent volumes, etc. But of course, as people want to kind of extend and use more sophisticated or advanced scenarios, they're going to have to pick up even more of them. And when you're working with the kubectl client, is what they call a CRUD client, CRUD, which stands for create, read, update, and delete. Okay, so when you're working with kubectl, you'll be taking these kinds of actions with the API. Okay, that's how the API has been designed. So obviously create will be creating new resources. So things like run and literally create will handle that. So create, run, and deploy, those are the kind of verbs that you can use for working with those. You'll be going and reading back resources once you've created them, or to interrogate the cluster or your deployments to check on their health, etc. You can update them in place, so you can edit them live, you can scale, or you can apply further definitions on top and modify them. And of course, you can delete as well. But I guess my point here is, when you're thinking about working with a larger infrastructure or a larger application that has multiple deployments, multiple pods, you're going to be perhaps taking action in one aspect of it, one set of pods that may actually have an upstream effect or a downstream effect on other pods or deployments as well. So if there's a big red light going off, or there is an outage, you may be looking at one namespace or one set of pods, and you have to go and read around in lots of different places to actually find out what the situation is, right? So you'll be describing lots of things at the same time. So you'll be asking lots of questions and then asking more questions and then asking more questions, so you can get to one answer. And I think that is, of course, kubectl absolutely should be used and learned, but if you want to have a really good view of situational awareness, I think this is where other tools can come in. So just the challenges here that I'm identifying is really just understanding the overall health of your applications, understanding the overall health of your cluster, okay, and being able to do that across multiple clusters as well, because you may have, for example, an application that spans multiple clusters from all the way through a software delivery pipeline from dev to production. And I mentioned before as well, there's a high barrier to entry and adoption. So people who may only be using Kubernetes casually, or just like only some of the time as developers, may not want to use, or may not find it an enjoyable experience or a confusing experience. And then also as well, Kubernetes is usually just one aspect of the picture. There'll be other tooling in place. There'll be other complementary technologies working on Kubernetes or with Kubernetes in order to in order to give you that the full functionality that you may be using. So security tools, for example, CI tools and more. And sometimes it is about working quickly for productivity's sake, but also working quickly in order to really address the any support issues and others as well. So this is why it's so important, I think, to have such a comprehensive view of your cluster. So quickly now, I'll just introduce Lens to you. So you may already know about it, you may already have it installed. If you don't, I won't feel bad if you go and quickly go to that URL down here in the corner and go and download it now, because it's free and open source, it's cross-platform, and it's our it's a fat client for Kubernetes, if you like. Now it's 100% free and open source, and always will be. And as I said, Mac, Windows, and Linux. So I'm running it here on my Mac, but you can run it on whatever you're working with. So it's our fat client for Kube. You can connect to multiple clusters and actually sort of surf the API, as well as use the terminal optionally as well, in order to kind of be really productive and really get a full view of all the objects running in your Kube cluster. One important thing that I really like to call out about this is that it's working with the native Kubernetes API, right? So we're not modifying anything about your cluster, and we're not modifying, we're not adding extra software or ways of working with the Kube cluster in terms of how we're communicating and getting information about things. We are just sending regular API calls to the API server and receiving regular API data back. And then presenting that to you just in a different way, in a more rich, maybe more informative way, in this app. Other things in here as well are things like built-in Helm support, as well as a terminal which is constantly in the right context when you're working with a particular cluster as well. So really neat, and I'll show you in just a second. And just some nice stats about it. I mean, there's lots of projects out there that are trying to solve this problem working with Kube, and this is sort of the most popular one, I would say, probably right now. Lots of people enjoying it and keep staying tuned on GitHub, of course, and you feel free to join and start it as well yourself. We have lots of unique users. We have some telemetry that kind of tells us how much it's being used, not much else, not anonymous data, but we're getting lots of regular use from people. So people are relying on it, people are using it regularly. And just tons of downloads as well, of course. And that includes things like it is self-updating, which is really nice as well. So we did something like 30 releases, in recent months. That's not even including things like release candidates and betas and things like that. So there is a really good pace of development happening here. It's a strong area of investment for us. And yeah, it's a really popular project in terms of Cloud Native too. So why don't I stop talking about it and just show you it as well, right? So hopefully this is all coming through. I'm going to make this a bit bigger for you now. And so this is the front end for it. So this is I've installed this just using the native DMG package you can get from the releases page on GitHub or at kslens.dev. And this is what you get when you, after you've configured a cluster. So why don't I start here? I'm here working in what is called the default workspace. So here you have different workspaces that can be comprised of different sets of clusters. So for example, if I work in different regions, or if I have a home setup and a work setup, for example, and I want to keep those things nice and separate, I can do that by having multiple workspaces. So I can actually add and compose even more, and then add and remove them easily. And then, rather like, I guess, Slack, you can have down the side here different sets of icons that can actually correspond to your different Kubernetes clusters. So I'm going to add one here, and it's going to look in your default location. So here on my system, this is where my kube config is living. And I can also open up an alternative one. So often when you deploy something like a new cluster or a K0s clusters or an EKS cluster, you can get hold of the kube config from it. You can just reference it here, and it'll interrogate that, and it gives us the entries which are available inside here. So I've got a couple of local kube cluster implementations. I'm using Minikube at the moment, and I've also got our demo lab and this one, which is already installed up here as well. So I can just add Minikube quite easily, but I can also add more as well if desirable. So I like to click more than one, and then I can add those in. Okay, and those are now imported. In fact, if I go and look at Minikube now, hopefully, because I should have started Minikube, should be waking up. Cool. Okay, so I'm in here now, and by the way, I can actually modify settings surrounding this too. So actually, how it's displayed, its name here in my console. I can choose different icons. So if you want to make it really nice and clear that one of them is dev, and save yourself from making make it really clear so you don't choose the wrong thing. Also things like, you get the icon for EKS or something like that. And yeah, actually, while I'm here, let me just call out, this works with all sort of standard kube clusters as well. So it's not something which is only working with MKE from Mirantis or K0s. This is used, against all sorts of kube clusters out there as well. So we can, we got various networking settings and things like that, so we can make sure we're communicating nicely. And then, yeah, in this case here, I actually installed what they call the metric stack. So we can inject a Prometheus stack installed into our cluster, and that's what gives us some of this information back as well. So you can just one-click install or one-click uninstall, and this gives us the rich information back about what's happening inside. So Minikube, of course, single cluster, and then as soon as I click on any object, I get tons of information back about its metadata, right? So I can surf this quite easily. You can see all the pods running here, recent events, etc. You also get like a nice route into actually working inside that. So I can cordon off nodes or drain them, etc. when I'm working in a multi-node cluster in my case. And start to sort of surf all of the metrics which are coming back from the Prometheus stack I've just installed. So this is true for pretty much any of the different object types. So when I jump in here to my workloads now, this is the overview screen, so you get nice kind of nice pretty health, and so you can start to kind of surf this, and you can see if there's something wrong straight away. You got recent events coming back here, so it's probably things happening when I was stopping and starting my Minikube earlier on. And also I can make sure that I've got new, all of these, I'm in the right namespace here, so I can actually narrow this down quite nicely, just to look at the individual ones, or I can remove that and look at everything again. And likewise, I can just move gradually through these as well. That you can see all the pods. I'll give you a pod view, see if there's something exciting happening here right now. But yeah, for any one of these, and you can see how snappy this is. Like, it's very kind of responsive. Getting to this kind of information would require probably a lot of practice, a lot of typing to get to all of this. So if I want to come and find out what's happening in my deployments, or what could possibly be wrong, I can get to that information quite quickly. So you can see here, it's just like, interrogate an object, move along, interrogate an object, move along. Here, I can check out the different, different aspects of configuration, as well as just the workloads themselves, even things like namespaces. I can go and I can make new ones here. So I can add one right here, and then straight off the bat, that's done. So you can see how quickly and kind of interactive it can be. It's going to work well with your access controls and things like that. So I'll only be able to see the things and take actions on things that I'm permitted to. This is important, of course, just to make sure that you don't, either think you can or see things that you shouldn't, as well. So as you can see, you can move right the way through all of these different API resources as I saw before, but you can surf them nice and interactively too. And then you can start to look at different events as well. And the search is real snappy as well. So if I try Minikube here, you can see it's actually filtering that real quick, and working with that. We have built in a terminal, so I can actually start with that. Actually, if I launch my terminal now, you'll see that actually, coincidentally, this is the same as my other shell. But if I jump to, let's say, another cluster, a multi-node cluster, this one here, I should be in the right context to interact with it. So you can see I'm in my MCC context here. and my mini cube context here. So I'm always in context. I'm always taking action in the low half of the screen on the objects which would be shown in the top half of the screen. And that's really nice because then I always know that I'm not cutting across different environments and stuff like that. I'm not going to be thinking I'm working in one place and actually taking action in another. There's built-in Helm support too. I want to call that out. So the Helm support is, so I mean, I have Helm installed anyway, I believe. Helm. So you can see that here, just like this is actually what we got on here. I've got the Mirantis ones and Bitnami and others, etc. here. But I can actually go and surf these charts now. And it should interrogate those as well, and I'll be able to see them. If it takes a second. Oh, that wasn't too bad. Okay, so here now it's basically gone and it's representing, you know, again, it's working natively with Helm. This isn't some kind of additional tool bolted onto it. It's just presenting that same information. So I can go and grab some project that I want to go and work with. So let's take something like, well, this is a demo after all. Let's take WordPress. From stable. Okay, so this is from the stable one, and it's going to go again, go and get information, present that up for me here. So this is the, you know, this is how I'd be working with it on the CLI, but I can review all of this, see all the README information, all of the configurables, etc. You know, really nice, sort of well presented, all the markdown right inside the client here. And then if I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and install. You can see as well, you know, I can drop down and see different versions. And if I choose to install, just like if I choose any object and I want to actually work with it, you know, if I need to work with the YAML, if I don't want to do kind of in-place editing of it in the client, I actually want to work with the YAML. I can always do that. Okay, so you can see here. This is all the configurables relating to WordPress. I can pick which versions I want to do. I can choose which workspace I want to deploy into. I can give my deployment a name, and then I can go ahead and install. Okay, so I'm going to probably click that. I'm not sure if it's going to get done in the time or if it's going to probably working with a load balancer configuration. But you can see how quickly that was kicked off, and if it doesn't work, we'll see how quickly we get the information about that. Bear in mind as well, like, so you can see we have access into access controls and things like that, but also things like custom resources. So here in my, I don't really have any CRDs in my Minikube because it's so vanilla, but over here in my Mirantis container cloud, where we use Kubernetes resources to define Kubernetes clusters themselves and the things which are inside it, I can actually go and surf this now as well. So I can see different clusters, etc. Start to interrogate those too, for example. I could even, and again, like if I do need to drop to the command line, if I do need to drop to the YAML to make interactive changes and save and edit, etc., then that's just going to work great for me. We're going to have we can do that, save and close, and that'll actually be committing the changes to the API. But I'm not going to do that, not in this case. But you can see how, you know, how nice and snappy this is. If I showed you on my system what the resource utilization is, it's probably going to show Chrome hogging everything. I think it's activity, isn't it? Yeah. You'll probably see this is going to be in the low hundreds of megabytes resource utilization. So if I bring this over here, what do we got? Lenses here, CPU mem. Yeah, 140 meg, right? So this isn't like this isn't like Chrome or, with all due respect, by the way, like Chrome or you know, Visual Studio or Slack and things like that, which, you know, the more they get loaded up, the more stuff going on it can really hoover up your RAM. Like I said, nice and snappy, nice and lightweight, which means it's even appropriate for running on, you know, some very you know, lightweight devices as well. Okay, so I'll pause for a second there and just jump on back. And can I just check with Patrik, are there any questions at this point before I just go through any of the last few slides here, just on what they've seen so far?
Yes, I have 2 questions. So
Okay.
the first one is if there's any plans on supporting Rancher installed Prometheus in the future.
Rancher installed Prometheus. Okay. I do not know. I mean, I know we don't have a very strong. We're happy to work with as much Kube as there is out there. Indeed, we've got customers who've got, vanilla Kube and Rancher and MKE and OpenShift and things like that. And we're quite happy to integrate with all of those things. In fact, what I'm about to go and talk about is the sort of the extension API that we've added in, and that means we can work flexibly. So there's no reason why we shouldn't. I'm not on the product team or on the project team. I would encourage you to check out the GitHub issues or to test it yourself. But I have not tried it against the Rancher installed Prometheus. But there's no reason why we couldn't do that. There's no reason why that couldn't be done. This is all open source software, and anything is possible. So I'm afraid that's a bit of a non-answer, but there's no plans in the that I've seen in the kind of the near-term major feature roadmap. But adding more flexible support tends to be something which is a sort of a minor change and could land in a point release.
Okay, so we take the next one. Is there a view to easily see the saturation for deployment, like how much of the resource limit is being used?
So when you see, what have I got here in the MTC? So when you're looking at the node utilization, it's not going to show necessarily the pressure or how the pod relates to its use of limits. I believe it's just going to show you the raw stats. So yeah, I know that's a question I've seen before, really, where people want to kind of see how much resources are being used relative to the reservations and limits being provided. I think most of the stats just relate to the individual, the individual stats in terms of CPU, hertz, etc. In fact, no, we actually have the requests and the limits as showing in the graph. It just wouldn't necessarily alert you. It would just be showing it here. So here we can see that it's requesting the 100 megas using 14. So that's kind of nice. But again, this will rely on you taking dropping the Prometheus endpoint into Lens.
Okay, I'm getting more questions as well here. Is there a way to connect Lens to Git repositories to do the work the GitOps way?
Well, not beyond working in the terminal, no. So when you want to work, yeah, so you're free to work in your terminal in an absolutely regular way. It's not today, at least, more of an IDE than what you see in terms of being able to modify the objects in situ in the cluster. But so beyond those two things, not today, no, because it's really about taking the existing API resources, rendering them out as YAML and modifying them and putting them back, or working in the terminal. And the terminal is a complete terminal. It's not it is fully featured. So you could work with tmux screen, etc. If you wanted to use your regular workflow in that way. But what we're not doing, for example, is saying that this is defined by this YAML file in this Git repository, and I'm modifying that, and I want to make a commit with a comment and things like that. Although there's no reason why we couldn't. This is that's an increasingly popular. I mean, that's a very important way to work, of course, is actually having all of this stuff committed into source control and having version control and pull requests, etc. around it. But to my knowledge, it's not yet possible to kind of work interactively with the Git repository backing it through the Lens UI. Okay, one more question. When you do modify a YAML on the fly and save and run it, and then a few days later you forgot what you did, is there a way to recall what changes you actually did? You can. No, so you can review. So when you hit save, it's basically it's rather like doing an in-place edit, like when you do a K edit. So it's not really committing that back, there will be events and logs of changes, but it won't necessarily be recording the diff between the two. The diff is only really there for the duration of the kubectl edit. So for the duration of me actually modifying this object, and then once that's done, it's disposed of in the same way that kedit would do.
Okay, no more questions right now.
No more questions right now. Those are good questions. And in a moment, I'll be talking just a little bit about how you can, well, where to go and log your issues about it, because those are two really totally legit use cases as well, at least, or 2 or 3 legit use cases there. And yeah, there's loads we want to do here, but this is all open source. And really, one of the other things I want to talk about here is the extension API. So the extension API was added in the 4.0 release, which landed just before Christmas. So rather like Chrome and rather like VS Code as well, they've exposed an API now to Lens, which allows it to be actually much more flexibly extended. So the actual core of it can kind of stay pretty pretty small and pretty lean, but then it can be extended to work with, and some of the earliest examples of this are working with the cloud native tools that surround it, right? So all of this stuff is JavaScript, for the most part, it's mostly JavaScript, and we have some nice sort of skeleton projects as well that you can use for getting started and creating your own extensions too. This example here, by the way, is like Starboard from Aqua, so their security tooling. So when you're looking at in this case, it's connected to the Starboard server, and you'll be seeing vulnerability reports coming back from the pods. So we have a replica set here based on this image, and in that image, you're now actually seeing the vulnerability reports that Aqua has identified relating to your deployment right there in Lens itself. Unfortunately, I don't have Starboard to be able to show you this live, but this is something we kind of get a little bit. We get notified, of course, by developers who are running or testing it, and we estimate there's at least 60 of these extensions out there in development. And we also know of examples not just of ISV integrations, but even like companies making their own ones to give their own view of their own infrastructure. So there's some larger organizations out there that have loads of tooling, and they have developer onboarding is an issue, and they want to be able to take that. They want to be able to onboard developers and give them their own rich experience for their own setup. So having like my company Lens extension that would really kind of tailor it to their own needs, because there's a lot of JavaScript skills out there, and it's not hard to try this stuff. I really recommend you take a look on that. And these are some of the orgs we've already started out with, some of the great companies out there who are already working on or have delivered Lens extensions. Okay, so this is going to be a really nice way to add that UI into that local experience, so you can really bring in, so you're not jumping between lots of different places, and you can interact through one UI. So we really want this to become much more useful. It's really useful already for working with Kube, but again, for most people, they're going to be pulling in other aspects of tooling as well. So they could be working, for example, there's different things about Kube when you're working in EKS, and so there's a extension for that. And there's some crazy ones as well. In fact, let me just, before I jump on that really interesting slide, there are examples of, for example, I don't know if you've seen Pod Invaders. But yeah, this is like, this is an embedded version of Pod Invaders you can see here as well. So I'm going to jump back to these URLs shortly, but you can see that there's it doesn't have to be completely serious either what you're embedding in this. But this is obviously one of those neat Kube demos, of course, just showing the API and deployments doing their thing. Just a few words on roadmap. Now, this is this comes with a health warning and disclaimer, just because this is really what we plan using the people that we have at Mirantis working on this, right? So this is they devote their time exclusively to making this software as good as they can, and to bring the experience they want to it. But of course, it's open source, and so there's lots of stuff which is coming in, lots of tests and issues being logged from the user community as well. So there's some really nice stuff that we're going to be adding in as well. Some of it's around, just some really nice, UI kind of tweaks and things like that. We've added in things like, so today actually I'm running on 406, the latest release, I believe, 406. And we are actually in this week in release candidate for 4.1. So at some point this week, when we're happy, that's going to be built and shipped and land on the releases page in GitHub. So you can see, more, surfacing more like Helm repo configuration and, being able to skip auto updates. Otherwise, it was just going to say to you, good morning. There is a, what I have is like, there's a new version available. Please restart, as I'm sure you're used to. But there's some pretty nice stuff in here. One of the ones that I'm most excited about actually is a protocol handler. So that you could, for example, either in a wiki page or even in your console output, for example, have a URI handler which can jump straight to that resource in Lens, and that's going to make for a very rich kind of experience when moving between different aspects of the infrastructure. And we're going to obviously make at the moment when you're working with extensions, you're able to go and get the code from GitHub, pull it into your put it onto your file system, and it will show. But obviously we want to make that a much more sort of store-like experience, if you like, as well. But you can see there's a lot that we want to get done. What's really nice is that we're releasing very, very often. So we get lots of feedback out there from customers, and we want more of it too. Oh, beg your pardon, wrong button there. So just to bring this home as well. So most of this stuff is just to Google away, by the way, but just to hammer this home, the kxlens.dev is the homepage for the project. You can get to pretty much everything else from there. Otherwise, that URL is for GitHub, so go ahead, star it, go and check it out. Those questions absolutely should be issues that we can put on there as well. You can read, there is a Slack for the Kubernetes Lens team. It's also the one used by the K0s team for our Kubernetes distro. So that's, you can go ahead, join on that. You can find me there too. And of course, we'll be tweeting at KXLens. And the developers themselves do a meetup as well that you should go and check out. That is where they talk through in quite some detail, or one of the last ones they did, I think you can go and get the recording of, is, build, like a workshop on building your first extension, which I really recommend you check out, because that will give you a bit more insight into how that's done. And the kind of the hello world one is actually super simple, so you can just take it from there. Okay, well, I said I'd be 45, and I think I've come in at somewhere around the 40, 43. So I want to budget a bit of time for those last few questions from you guys. If there are any more, please, Patrik.
Thank you, Stephen. Perfect timing. I actually don't have any more questions at the moment in the chat. I'll double check both of them, but they are empty. But I have a question.
Okay.
So this is a free open source piece of software, but if you want to, is it possible to get support on it?
Oh, so we've had a lot of requests around that, and it's something which it's unconfirmed really at the moment. We are trying to assess the demand that there is out there for that. Some of our very large customers will, who are using, our other, Kubernetes, our Kubernetes distro and our multi-cluster management and things like that. Those are people who are already large customers of ours and are, of course, they're using Lens. But today we aren't yet sort of productizing it because we don't yet have, well, we're basically assessing the demand for it. So, watch this space, never say never. At the moment, a lot of dev tools, what they want is like a per seat license, email support, that kind of thing. That's the sort of thing we're looking into. But at this stage, nothing's, nothing's out there for you to go and buy or subscribe. The software is and will always be free and open source. It's really about, people who might want support or might want custom extension development, that kind of thing. That's what people are talking to us about. So it's all very custom at the moment, but watch this space. There could be something, more productized and more generally available in the future.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'm gonna till the screen back from you, just to show one last slide.
No trouble.
So thank you, Stephen. I'll switch back to Swedish. Tack allihopa för att ni tog er tid att lyssna den här morgonen. Jag vill bara påminna om nästa vecka, samma tid, samma plats, 9:30 på torsdag. Så kör Robert Sördlund hos oss en demo av ROK. Så jag hoppas ni är tillgängliga även nästa vecka. Inspelningen från idag kommer att postas på vår YouTube-kanal. Jag tror det går ut ett mejl från Kai här inom kort. Som ni kan dela med andra personer som ni tror kan vara intresserade. Så stort tack för idag och hoppas vi syns nästa torsdag.